Futurism was an Italian art movement focused on speed, technology, and violence that began in 1909 after Filippo Tommaso Marinetti published the Manifesto of Futurism. His manifesto was highly influential and inspired an entire generation of Italian artists to make futurist paintings, sculptures, photographs, architectural drawings, and even cooking recipes. But more importantly, his manifesto captured the already existing zeitgeist of nascently industrialized Italy at the time. According to Anastasia S. Korpilov, young Italian artists detested the fact that their country was associated mostly with ruins and sculptures of antiquity and aimed to design a brighter future. We're going to talk about futurism on this week's episode of Silent Generation because we think we can draw parallels between it and the modern NIMBY movement, and also simply because their work was extremely beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was interested to talk about this. At first, I was like, wait, this like overlaps a lot with interwar modernism. But just the more I read about it, like this seemed like it was, I guess, like sharing some roots. They took it in a direction that like it burned very brightly and then it burned out, kind of perfectly with World War II. And so it doesn't really like play perfectly into the history of the like ascent into modernism that we saw post-war.
Yeah, it definitely gets included in the art canon, but I think because it was so specific to Italy and also Russia a bit too, we're going to talk about that. It just wasn't like there weren't American, British, French artists really working in this movement. And I think that's part of why it's lesser known.
Yeah, like other countries did have like movements. I was thinking about the American Ashcan School, which is like Edward Hopper, which is people who were impressionists and then said like, oh, this isn't showing life how it really is in the city. But they didn't go in this direction at all. like if you look at Nighthawks, you're just like, oh, I could see how an expressionist would get tired of hay bales and want to paint a diner. But you can't see that line directly to the very like zany works.
Yeah. So that begs the question, why did futurism happen? What were the conditions that led to its emergence? So futurism occurred primarily in two countries in the early 20th century, Italy and Russia. When we discuss futurism on this week's episode, whenever we use the word futurist and we don't add a modifier of Italian or Russian, just assume it's Italian because we're going to specify it's Russian when we get to that. Generally, we're talking about Italy. But futurism spawned in these two countries because these two countries industrialized later than most of the other big European countries. Yes, there were other smaller ones like, say, the Balkans, like who knows when those industrialized. But these two countries, Russia and Italy, they only started to really industrialize in the 1880s. So by the time this movement starts with the Futurist Manifesto in 1909, things had gone in motion, but the Italian artists specifically, they thought their culture was impeding the industrialization that they were aware of in other nations, and they thought that they were the problem. They wanted to do away with their culture to speed things up.
You realize that it is a blessing to industrialize earlier, to have the period stretch out, or also to like start to industrialize when the machines that you're talking about are not as advanced as they are later. England had like not really peasant revolts, like working class revolts in the like 1800s, but like it wasn't, I don't know, there wasn't all the machines and technology that the Italians were dealing with when they had their growing pains.
Yeah, I mean, England had 7 generations to industrialize. They were the first. They were able to do it a bit more gradually. Germany was 4. France, I think, was 2.5. Italy and Russia, I don't know. I don't feel like it took a long time. I mean, if you look at southern Italy today,
it's like, are they done yet? Like, no, that's unfair. I'm just picturing our southern Italian listeners. Hey.
But yeah, so let's talk about some dates, which I feel like these probably go in one ear out the other for listeners, but they're still important to talk about. So with Italian futurism, it lasted a lot longer than Russian futurism. It began in 1909. It ended in 1944 with Marinetti's death. So it had like a decent chunk of time. And then Russian futurism started in 1912 after a small group of Russian poets published their manifesto, a slap in the face of public taste. And it fizzled out after the Russian Revolution of 1917, very soon. So it was only like 5 years.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, I mean, the Italian one it happened for a long enough time. Like, I don't know, we're saying dates go in and out of people's heads, but like I have a very clear image of 1910s it's like World War II, mustaches, the helmets, like that kind of stuff. In the 1920s, everyone's a flapper. 1930s, depression. Like in the 1940s, like depression, but it's World War II now. And so just to see that these characters like persist throughout all of that, and there's like in the Italian futurism, and then there's young people who come into the movement, there's old people who leave, and then in Russian, it's just not like that. It's like they got